Hey, welcome. This is Sane the Legend, and I'm doing my final tutorial for this game. There's gonna be no music, just sound effects and stuff. We're making 2 more first-person games because Trials Rising is gonna come out pretty soon. Alright, I have a automatically reduce sound effect to my voice. If my voice is too loud, you could always turn down the volume, of course. Right, so yeah, so I'm gonna make an FPS tutorial. Okay? And I already made an FPS. This is gonna be Bog's FPS and the first person tutorial from Trials Evolution. I combined them both together and I made my own FPS. Now, it's very short logic, actually. This is a very, very well-working FPS with a jump button, with a footsteps mechanic, and with a, ignore this part, this is the start event. Okay, it comes with a timer, it comes with left stick and right stick horizontal value for camera and left stick, using the pre-made modification for the game. I also made my little fancy checkpoint system that actually is using a portal tool and a 500-mile invisible wall, right? So you can make large-scale checkpoints, right? So first things first is we're gonna start with how the FPS actually works. So since the thing is all the way over here, so in Trials Rising, I'm going to use this thing that I have right here because it's the easiest setup. So forget Sane's rig or any of the other tutorials that are really out there if they're complete or incomplete. I actually want to make an FPS that's very simplified and very complete. Even comes with invert Y, vertical and horizontal axis. Horizontal X and Y vertical. So you want to start with a invert trigger. Make sure it's at 1 tick. This doesn't matter because it's a skill game. And this is going to be your instant event. Okay, this is everything needs the trigger. Alright, so the red arrow is the trigger format. The green arrows are like mathematical calculations. The blue arrows are usually something that's going to trigger, and then the green dotted lines are usually an indication of something. The blue dotted lines are usually an instance or a type of object you are selecting. So this is pretty much what the Trials editor is for. So you would want the second one to be an OPE, X, Y, and Z. Your X, your Y to be this, and your Z to be here. Okay, make sure local is off, because so this setup could work exactly. Make sure you select your X, Y, and Z coordinates to the game character, because what we're trying to do, not globally, not locally, globally we are trying to get positional coordinates so we could have fancy things follow the character. So this is a programmable following OPE. So there's the default following OPE, which you could just... So it's like an adjustable OPE. So you know the default adjustable OPE is invert trigger, local off, X, Y, and Z, and you can have a thing to add and subtract the height values. So we could adjust the height and subtract the height if we want something underneath our game character, let's say raindrops, or above our character, which is rainfall, and the rain will follow our character, giving us an idea that is raining all around us. So this is pretty much what we're trying to do here. So the camera is going to be our head, and then we're going to calculate the angular speed and the angular height of our camera, like a neck turning in reality as well. So enough chit chatter, and I just want to explain it, what we're doing here. And then for this, your operand 1, okay, is going to be this for your jump button. If you don't want a jump button, you could skip this step. But this is for the jump button. We are doing a negative 95 underneath the game character, and we're going to put an invisible wall acting as our jump. Okay, and that's how I'm doing my jump. Okay, and then our is the y-axis, because we're doing the y coordinate. Okay, the second OP is the same thing, local off. Make sure our x is x, our y is y, and our z is z. Make sure modify rotations on, make sure set rotations on. Make sure our yaw is this right here. Okay. And make sure the pitch is 90. Okay. Our second OPE is, and then we're going to see what is highlighting. Okay, so going back to the first OPE, we're highlighting obviously this thing to go underneath the rider. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. What this is selecting, and make sure you're using the filter to go through the red. So filter means the constant string, so you guys should know that. And the targets that the second one is selecting, the second OPE, is the vertical axis, left stick, fuck, I forgot. It's the it's the thing that controls your the speed. It's the acceleration of the left stick, the force, physical force that controls your character. That's basically how we're going to move our character, with physical forces, and it's going to be modified, so it's going to think it's something else. And then our third one is going to be our horizontal. Okay. And now between vertical and horizontal, you got to select the one for rain, because you don't want the one vertical for rain, because then when you look up, the rain's going to look up. You want the horizontal, so it always stays in horizontal. Okay? So, are we done the third one? So the third one is X, X, Y, Y, Z, Z. Yaw is this one, and then 90. And now this one is going to be subtract. It's going to be 90 as well. Our operand 1 is going to be the opposite one right here. This variable data source. Now we're moving on to OPE4. OPE4 is selecting the camera or a gun. If you want a gun or a flashlight or something that operates in first-person mode, this is the one that you want to select. This is the first-person mechanic. If you want a third-person camera, it works the same way. Except the third-person camera, you would want it to connect it to a joint, like this. And then if you want to turn the third person, it's going to be like that. But be mindful, when you do third person, the camera can go through the floor, and there's not really a clipping camera mechanic in this game, so you got to be careful. Alright? So we're going to reset that because we don't want to... Alright, so this is OPE4. Now we got to go into the parameters again. X is X. Y is this one. And remember, this is adding something above the game character. And Z is Z. Modify rotation, set rotation. Yaw is this one. And pitch is this one. This is going to be our camera rotations, where we get to in a second. Okay? I think that's all there is to that one. Now this one right here, did we? Yeah. Now this one, all pretty much what's going to do is operand 1 is going to be this one. That's going to be our camera sensitivity. Our sensitivity right now is 1.5, 1.50, and that's usually 50%, you could say. But that's like a decent recommendation. And then our operand 2 is going to be Y, because it's going to be our Y-axis again. Alright, and I selected 150. Actually, 150 is not the sensitivity. 150 is the height. Okay? And this is to adjust the height of the camera. So scratch what I said. It's not sensitivity, it's height. Okay? Sensitivity is over here. It's on a 6, so it's slightly above 5. So 0.50, depending from 0, which is really slow, and higher. So higher, 0 is like the slowest you can get. You probably won't even move, and then the highest you can go from there. Okay, so 60-60. Alright, so the best camera you want on position, mine has cut interpolation, FOV, depth of field of view, is going to be, FOV means field of view, depth of field of view. That's default. Make sure, if you want an exposure setting, you can press Y. I put it to there. You'll increase exposure over a certain amount of time. Make sure your auto adjust brightness is default. If it's on auto, it's gonna be a shitty ass webcam you get from a fucking flea market or something. Select as game character if you want it to be your starting camera. Okay, so my linear data source is pretty much it's gonna go up to 100. Gradually, it's going to take 2 seconds or a second to get back to regular exposure. Okay, so that's the first part of the FPS. Okay, the second part is crucial. Okay. So this is our operand 1, and this is our operand 2. Okay. This is our left stick vertical value and our right stick horizontal value. Okay, we want our operand 1 to be that, and our operand 2 to be that. Okay? Same thing for this one. Operand 1 is and operand 2 is that one. So it knows. It's going to multiply, remember, multiply, okay, these coordinates this way. It's going to borrow this value up here, and it's going to borrow this value up here. Make sure you share the impulse, the red line across. Okay, and it's also going to borrow the value like it is. Make sure you set it to decrease. So it's going to decrease this variable data source down here, and it's going to decrease this variable data source down here. Okay? And then this one right here, it's going to share this value as well from up there down here. Okay? And same thing with this one over here. It's going to share the one from up top. Okay? So make sure you got those in place. Don't do any of those. Those are variable data sources. So those are going to change based on the movements of your camera and based on the movements of the player. So everything can mathematically adjust and multiply and decrease and subtract and whatever to the player's different movements around world coordinates, okay? Make sure you have a generic filter. The comparison value is the first one. And your second generic filter, make sure you compare the first one, is also the first one, okay? Make sure you press it on false, which is to continue the string of impulses. Make sure you're on trues, or on here, and then your on true here is there. This is going to control the camera's lock. So when you look up Y, it's going to lock at a certain height, so 70 degrees, and then greater, which is down, is going to lock at 60 degrees downwards. So you won't look all the way around, just like a real neck would in real life. So you just created a physical joint with logic. Okay? less than minus 70 and greater than 60. Make sure your set value event is targeting this one, and make sure this set value event is targeting the same one again. Okay, and this is going to decrease your vertical. Remember, it's all targeting the vertical because it's locking the vertical axis. And I got this from the Trials Evolution tutorial, which I think Mutatus or someone built. Okay. So since we got that one out of the way, we know its positioning here. Now this part is very easy. Before we get to that part, we're going to work on the invert axis. You can grab whatever you want as buttons to invert. Make sure you're on presses, or you're on presses, or you're on downs, okay? Make sure your buttons are off, or whatever. You can turn them on by able or disabled, okay? Every time you turn on a button, make sure you turn it off. So both of these turn off. You know how to use your object share filter to continue the string, okay? Now your ons is going to be the opposite. Make sure you turn the opposite of the ons, and they will work as double triggers. So I can just press the button, flashlight on and off, flashlight on and off. It's almost like a toggle switch, but it's a more better toggle switch. And now for your invert to work, it's going to be negative 60, positive 60, negative 60, positive 60. Positive is not inverted, and negative 60 is inverted. The same thing with this one. This one is horizontal invert, and this one is vertical invert. It's the same principle. Okay, now we're moving on to player left stick controllability with force. Same thing with this one. Make sure it's left stick vertical value, and then left stick horizontal value. Horizontal meaning the horizon. Vertical is up and down, so you know. You could tie these two to a data source. And so what I did is I tied data source, and operand 2 is also a data source. Okay, and my speed I chose is 9,000. You could choose whatever value you want, okay? And you want to test game character speed to know that value. So go into track settings. Select skill game. Make sure you select the game character that you want to select. Okay. And then your game speed, I recommend going to counter 1 and selecting game character speed. You can also hide this value in style going all the way to the right and hide the value so you don't have to redo that setup again. Okay, and that's so you can track your game character speed that way to know what the recommended speed for your control character is. I chose 9,000 because it's a little bit fast and it's a little bit easier to maneuver. This is your horizontal value. It doesn't have to be facing horizontal, but just put it anyway. Okay? So you know. So you're going to go into the first area effector. The area effector can be found in common. All of these tools can be found in triggers and events. Okay? So most of this stuff is found in common and triggers and events. So you know. So we're going to go triggers and events and then common. And then it should be in physical tools. Alright, so right here you have, make sure it's the lowest amount 0.10 meters. Go to directional force value. Okay? And make sure it's this one up here. Same thing applies to this one up here as well, okay? Those are your directional forces. Make sure they're multiplying the directional force so it's better. If you're adding, you're going to play around with numbers of 1,000,000, okay? To get your proper force. And then your second setup, make sure your fade is 0. Your damping is 0 unless you want to do some outer space stuff. You could do that. There's rejection force. Then there's the invert. We already have inverted. So you don't even have to touch that. Make sure your affected object instances, both of these, are the player. Same thing applies for the other one. Okay, this one as well. and it's highlighted blue to give you a visualization that it's highlighted, okay? And when you start skill games, please disable the B button so it doesn't have to harm you again. To disable the B button, state for this. The state is 0, 1, 2, 3, so you will pick 3, turn it off, make sure it's at 0, 16 milliseconds, turn it on, and make sure you have a invertible trigger, 0, 16, turn all these checkboxes on in 1, and then boom. And there you go, you don't have to deal with the B button ever again. This is your start event. Every time you start an FPS, make sure you have a camera checked with game character. This is going to be your starting camera. And then you could select your other camera by selecting this one on the same type of trigger. So it's going to start at the game camera, then it's going to transition to the other camera. Let's say if you wanted to make a skill game with multiple camera changes and stuff like that, you could do that now with this setup. Alright, ignore this. This is just extra logic. This is a checkpoint system, which we get into after, because I already made a tutorial. Okay, so we got the movable stair. We got the fundamentals of how a first-person game should correspond with each other, right? We got everything right. We know what tool cards to use. We went into all the menus. We got the left stick horizontal forces. Now we're going to go to the jump button, okay? So the jump button logic is a little bit hard, okay? But it's simple logic, so you should understand, okay? Make sure your jump button is off at all times, okay? Make sure you select the jump button. So remember, this is the operand for this. Remember, 0.95. So it's 95 underneath, 0.95 underneath the game character. So what are you going to do is you're going to go to -40. So it's going to touch the character and lift up the character, clipping the character a little bit. You're going to pass the impulse to here. At the same time, it's going to make a swish sound, which is your jump button. It's going to turn off your button, so you can't press it anymore. It's going to decrease the 9,000 speed to make it 3,000, so you won't be able to fly when you jump or glide. It's going to have a delay of 300 milliseconds, 18 ticks. Then it's going to go to the default position it was -95, which is underneath. Okay? Hopefully that was all clear. So it's going to go up and down in 300 milliseconds. You can adjust this value for a higher jump. You can adjust this value for even higher jump as well. Okay? This is your player gravity. Okay? Alright, this is the -2000 gravity. Alright? Before we get into how the player works, we're going to make the jump. Make sure you have a invisible collision that's at 1 meter. Make sure your physics type is connected to this 0, 1, 2, 3. Contact response is 1. Okay. Alright. Make sure you have 2 triggers. Your object instances 1 is the character. Your object instances 2 is all static objects in the entire world of Trials Fusion. Okay, you could also add the ground, water, dynamic objects, objects with physics, and anything else you'd like. Make sure both of these triggers are disabled after on hit, so it works as a double functioning trigger. Okay? Advanced options, all of that stuff. So leave that. So you're on hit, and then you're on leave. You go to advanced options, on leave. When you leave the floor, something's going to happen. When you hit the floor again, something's going to happen. Okay? When you leave the floor, when you hit the floor, the sound effects for the footsteps is going to turn on. When you leave the floor, the sound effects for the footsteps are going to turn off. We'll get that into in a minute. When you hit the floor, your jump button collision is on. When you leave the floor, your jump button collision is off. So when you're in the air, doesn't matter if you drop off a ledge or jump, you won't be able to press the jump button. It's going to be disabled because even if you're pressing it, there's nothing to jump off of because that platform, the invisible platform, has no collision anymore. When you're on the ground, your speed is 9,000. When you leave the ground, your speed is 3,000. So there's no jumps and speeds, okay? When you hit the floor, right, there's going to be a blush sound, and that's going to be a modified footstep sound. So a single hit, like a boom, like a sound of hitting the floor. This is your anti-jump bumps button. So any walls or surfaces you may have, you can actually send a value to increase your player gravity so we won't be able to jump. So let's say if you collide with a wall, any wall of your choosing, and then you say, okay, when you hit the wall on hit and on active at the same time, player weight is 15,000, so you won't be able to jump up the wall. You understand? And then you can also, I just turned off the jump button. So when you're on active with a wall, you won't be able to jump up the wall. Okay? You can also do a double jump with this mechanic, but you just have to multiply the string, right, and collide it with this. Okay? But for this simple tutorial, we're just going to make one single jump. Okay? So that's how our jumping mechanic's going to work. Now we're going to move on to the footstep mechanic. So there's a footstep mechanic way across the world, okay? There's going to be an option for static. Make sure your static option is this. 0 means not static, means that it plays locally. And then static means it plays globally, so it plays everywhere. So what's going to happen here is your game character speed, you're going to grab a generic filter. Game character speed is the generic filter, is the comparison value. It's going to be greater. So if it's greater than 1000 speed, which is the movement, the start speed of your character, it's going to trigger the footsteps. If it's lower than 1000 speed, it's not going to trigger the sound for the footsteps. So on false, lower than 1000, less than 1000, and greater than 1000 is going to be on true. This is going to be a constant effect, always playing. So it's going to play footstep sounds on 516 milliseconds. So it's going to be like step, 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 step constantly. It's going to keep step constantly on. But this determines whether it's static or non-static. So meaning that it works as a footstep system based on the speed of your character. And when you jump or fall off a ledge, this sound is going to turn off. Make sure this is pumping intervals at all times. Okay? So back to the footstep mechanic. When it's on and off, make sure you turn on and off the generic filter. When a generic filter's off, it's not going to play any sound effects. So when you're in the air, there's no footstep sounds, or when you're dropping off a ledge. So when you're in the air, period, there's no footstep sounds. Alright, so the trigger knows to turn off the generic filter. I know, right, it's that easy. Not really. And that's the footstep mechanic part of it. Now we're going to go to the player setup. Make sure you're at the lowest. Mine says keep position, follow game character, 5 minimum meters is your physical bubble. The terrible thing about Trials Fusion is there's only one physical bubble. And if you want to have multiple physical bubble, you have to animate the physical bubble various different areas. So just to try to make animations that work like physics, that take a little bit more work. You don't need any of this. Now we're gonna set up this. Make sure I chose variation 6. Okay, which is the round thing. Physics is off. Physics will turn off as soon as the game starts. You can have it on if you want. I remind you every time you do a camera transition animation, you turn physics off. You don't want to glitch out the game. You can actually make the player speed, the 9000, to 0 and the 9000 again. So when you're able to move your character, make sure you turn off the generic filter so you don't make footstep sounds as well when you're doing cinematical events, okay? I made mine's 100 kilograms. My friction is 90, so it still rolls. My linear damping is 99%, and my angular damping is 95%, which can actually play as your sensitivity in a way. My global damping is 0, is turned off. My restitution, my bounce is 0. You don't want any bounces. It's going to screw up your mechanic. Buoyancy just means that if you can swim or not. Okay, turning up the value means that you could swim. Disable global gravity because we're going to use our own custom gravity, -2000. Make sure it's custom response. Make sure collision sound is off so you don't make a collision sound. Make sure you can turn on fast object if you want, but it will decrease performance. That's only if your object's really fast. I recommend you doing that. So that's how you do the game character parameters. Now for last but not least, we're going to go on to the timer. This is for any values you want, okay? So if we're going to go into values and how to program certain HUD values, okay? You want any HUD values descending, right, as primary values. The scoreboard will track primary as your primary, your secondary. Your counters actually don't count. These are just alternate setups. So my time is going to be 31 minutes, which is max time. Max time is like 31 something. 31 is the max time I chose, and 60,000. You could adjust the value for the exact amount so people don't go over so they don't cheat. Okay, so your time value actually now, my time I chose for an accurate time frame is 31 seconds and 115,000 N value. And this is going to play like as your timer. You can stop. You can reset this value and stop the timer at any time you please and continue the timer. But be wary, if you stop the timer, it doesn't mean that there's a hidden clock in the game that still continues to count time. So be very wary of that. Trials, skill games can only be around for 31 minutes even if you stop this time or not. So remember that. There's a hidden timer that they don't tell you about. Alright? Make sure when you do games of all types, you make sure it's static. When something's static, it plays all the time. I see a lot of beautiful maps that don't know how to put static sounds and unstatic sounds. Make sure your sounds are static. Okay? Alright. And also a great tip too, when something is invisible, it could still have collision. So if you want to make a driving line that has perfect, you can have all custom collisions and you'll have no more problems. Alright. Well, this is our checkpoint system, our final parameter in our full, complete FPS by Sane. The easiest, best FPS. Shout out to Primitive Bog. Shout out to Mutatus. And shout out to whoever made I think it was Mutatus, the one in Trials Evolution, the first person skill game. And shout out to me for making it, because this is a modified version of my own as well, right? And then we'll test the skill game. So this is the first person skill game. Make sure you have... This is nothing of its importance. When the game starts, you can turn off the... this is to measure it. Right now it's at 1. When the game starts, it'll be at 500, so it will be massive. So when the player touches that thing, it will be activating as a checkpoint, okay? So make sure you have a following OPE to the teleporter. Make sure position X, Y, and Z are targeted here. Make sure this is targeted to the game character, okay? So this will follow the game character at all times, but make sure the physics type is on 3, which is invisible. For some reason, it matters. It screws up your jump. So it's off and this is off as well, okay? Make sure your object instances 1 is the player and your 2 is this thing right here. On hit, make sure your on hit trigger is disabled so it works all the time as a constant checkpoint. Make sure all of your teleporters are with these settings right here that I have. Okay? Make sure your active portal is this right here. And make sure that it's activated by object instances, the player. All of these, or it won't work. Make sure that your portal pair is with all these other portals. And the portals are going to be numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're going to be using 5 checkpoints. These are going to be 5 areas. My capture card's glitching out. 5 areas. Okay, so pretty much what's going to happen here. Yeah. So what's going to happen here is this is going to go there. It's going to follow the chain. Okay, make sure both of these are going to be targeted to turn on and off the checkpoint. Make sure both of these triggers are going to turn on the collision for the checkpoint. And then make sure your interval is going to be 100 milliseconds. If it's less, it won't work. If it's more, then it won't be instant. So make sure it is 100 or it won't work. Okay, sorry about my capture card speed. I don't know what the hell is going on. Okay, so make sure all of these outs are always off. Okay? Make sure each level, like level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is connected to this. And make sure that object instances 1 is the game character. Okay. Object instances 2 is whatever area you wish to desire. Okay, make sure all of these have a double function. Make sure they're on hit to this. So what's going to happen here is every time you activate an area, it's going to teleport, and if you fall off the map, it's going to go to the central area. So we're going to test it to see if it actually fucking works. Even though my skill game sucks, or my capture card sucks. I'm recording right now. So there you have it. That is a FPS that I made with shit recording apparently because I wasn't paying attention. And hopefully that works. It's very simple logic. Hopefully if my voice is laggy then I'm gonna have to redo this, of course. And if the video is bad then I have to redo this. But I'm saying the legend, that was my FPS tutorial. Sorry if my capture card was fucking stupid. Because apparently when I use the editor, my Elgato just can't handle the editor. I don't know why. It can handle everything else just fine, but when it comes to the editor, it seems to be going all over the place. But, said as, I hope you enjoyed my FPS. It was only 39 minutes. The first part was hard, but that's the fundamentals of making an FPS. In Trials Rising, I will redo this again. So it'll be way clearer, and my capture card will be better, apparently. And yeah, and I'll build it from scratch using this basic setup. This is the best FPS tutorial for Trials, and I'll see you guys on Trials Rising with this same tutorial, but I'm going to make it from scratch and explain to you what I'm doing. Alright, later guys. And gals, for watching the tutorial. Saint Azel.